The dust swirled around Riven's massive paws as he paced outside the human settlement's gates. Every step felt like betrayal to his ancestors, yet every breath reminded him why he was here. His cubs were dying, and his pride meant nothing against their fading heartbeats. The Lupari pack leader had walked for 3 days across the barren plains of New Terra, leaving his territory for the first time in 20 seasons. His silver fur, once pristine and commanding, now carried the grime of desperate travel. The human guards watched him through their metal barriers, hands resting on weapons that could end his life in seconds. "I need to speak with your healers," Riven called out in broken human language. Each word tasted bitter on his tongue. Learning the invader's speech had seemed pointless when they first arrived. Now it might be his cub's only hope. The younger guard laughed nervously. "The big dog thinks he can just walk up and demand medical attention. Should we call animal control?" His partner, an older woman with scars across her cheek, studied Riven more carefully. She had seen enough combat to recognize desperation when it stood before her. This one's different. Look at his eyes. Riven's golden gaze never wavered. He had practiced this moment during his long journey, imagining every possible response. Anger he could handle. Violence he understood, but the casual dismissal in the young guard's voice made his claws dig into the hard earth. "My children are sick," Riven continued, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Your medicine might save them." The older guard spoke into her communication device. Minutes passed like hours before the settlement's main gate opened with a mechanical hiss. David Ross emerged, medical bag slung over his shoulder and irritation written across his weathered face. The human medic had dealt with injured colonists, equipment malfunctions, and supply shortages since arriving on New Terra. Alien house calls were not part of his job description. He took one look at Riven and immediately noted the pack leader's condition. Dehydrated, exhausted, and radiating the kind of stress that came from watching loved ones suffer. "You're a long way from your territory," David observed, keeping his distance but not reaching for any weapons. "What makes you think I can help?" Riven's throat constricted. In his own language, he was eloquent, capable of stirring his pack to action with mere words. In human speech, he felt clumsy and small. "My cubs, 3 of them. A sickness takes them slowly. Our healers cannot stop it. How many others?" David asked, his medical instincts overriding his suspicion. 47 young ones across 5 packs. All dying the same way. Riven's voice cracked slightly. "The elders say it is natural selection, that the weak must fall so the strong survive. But these are not weak cubs. They were healthy, playful, full of life until this thing began eating them from inside." David studied the massive alien before him. Riven stood nearly 8 feet tall with powerful limbs and predatory features that could tear a human apart without effort. Yet something in his posture spoke of a father's helplessness rather than a warrior's threat. "Describe the symptoms," David said, surprising himself by taking a step closer. Riven's ears perked forward slightly, the first sign of hope he had shown. "It starts with loss of appetite, then weakness in their limbs. Their fur loses color, becoming gray like old bone. They sleep more and more until they barely wake at all. Our healing songs do nothing. The traditional medicines make them worse." The medic frowned. None of this matched any terrestrial diseases he knew, but the progression sounded viral. "How long from first symptoms to death comes in 12 to 15 of your days if nothing changes their path," David mentally calculated. If 47 young aliens were already infected and the disease continued spreading, the entire Lupari population on New Terra could face extinction within months. From a purely practical standpoint, the humans needed the native species for ecological balance. The Lupari controlled several pest populations, and their territory contained valuable mineral deposits that required careful negotiation to access. "I'll need to examine them," David said finally, "but I can't promise anything. Your biology is completely different from ours." Riven's massive frame seemed to deflate with relief. "You will come to our settlement?" "Against every regulation in the book, probably." David turned toward the guard station. "But dying kids are dying kids, regardless of species." The older guard stepped forward. "Dr. Ross, Captain Hayes specifically ordered no direct intervention in native affairs. The Colonial Council was very clear about maintaining separation." David paused, remembering similar arguments from military commanders who prioritized politics over casualties. How many good soldiers had died because someone in an office decided their lives were acceptable losses for the bigger picture? Then Captain Hayes can court-martial me after I get back, David replied. I didn't take an oath to let children die because of paperwork. Riven watched this exchange with growing understanding. The human healer faced opposition from his own pack, just as Riven faced criticism from the elders. Perhaps these two species were not so different after all. There will be resistance, Riven warned. Many of my people see humans as invaders. They will not welcome you in our territory. And many of my people see your kind as dangerous predators, David countered. Seems like we both have trust issues to work through. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the settlement as David gathered his equipment. He packed everything portable from the medical bay, knowing he might need to improvise treatments with limited resources. His combat medic training had taught him to work miracles with basic supplies. But alien physiology presented entirely new challenges. Riven waited patiently, though every instinct screamed at him to run back to his cubs immediately. Time was his enemy now, each moment bringing them closer to the point where no medicine could help. Ready? David announced, shouldering a pack that seemed impossibly heavy for one human to carry. As they walked through the settlement gates together, colonists stopped their work to stare. Some pointed and whispered among themselves. Others shook their heads in disapproval. A few mothers pulled their children closer, as if Riven's presence brought danger to their own young. Your pack will not trust me, David observed as they began the journey across the plains. Trust must be earned, Riven replied, but desperation makes people consider impossible things. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of distant storms. Both beings walked in silence, each knowing they were stepping into unknown territory that could change everything between their peoples. Behind them, the human settlement grew smaller. Ahead lay a dying pack and the fragile hope that two different species could find common ground in the face of shared loss. The Lupari settlement appeared through the morning mist like something from a fever dream. David had expected primitive dwellings, perhaps caves or simple shelters. Instead, he found himself looking at an intricate network of structures carved directly into massive rock formations, connected by graceful bridges that seemed to defy human engineering principles. Dozens of Lupari emerged from various levels of the settlement as Riven led David through the main entrance. Their golden eyes tracked every movement the human made, ears flattened against their skulls in obvious hostility. Low growls rippled through the crowd like a dangerous undercurrent. They think you bring death with you, Riven explained quietly. To them, humans are creatures of metal and poison who destroy everything they touch. David ignored the hostile stares and focused on his medical observations. Several adult Lupari showed signs of stress and exhaustion, probably from caring for sick young ones around the clock. Their normally pristine fur appeared unkempt, and their movements carried the heavy weight of communal grief. Nala emerged from a dwelling carved high into the rock face, moving with the fluid grace of a born predator despite her obvious emotional distress. Her silver fur had dulled to the color of storm clouds, and her eyes held the fierce desperation of a mother watching her children fade away. This is the human? She asked in her own language, studying David with unconcealed suspicion. He says he can help, Riven replied, switching to Lupari speech that sounded like wind through canyon walls. Humans destroy. They do not heal. David understood none of the words but recognized the tone easily enough. He had heard similar conversations in war zones where medics were viewed as enemy collaborators, simply for trying to save lives on both sides of a conflict. Can I see the cubs now? David asked, setting down his medical pack and opening it to reveal an array of instruments and medications. Nala's hackles rose as she caught sight of the metal tools and strange vials. To her eyes, they looked more like weapons than healing implements. But Riven placed a gentle paw on her shoulder, and she reluctantly led them up a winding stone path to their family dwelling. The interior took David's breath away. Carved walls displayed intricate artwork that told stories in flowing symbols and images. Soft cushions made from woven plant fibers created comfortable sleeping areas. But all of this faded into background when David saw the three small forms lying motionless in the center of the room. Ash, Storm, and Ember barely looked alive. Their once bright silver fur had turned the color of old ash, hanging limp against their small bodies. Their breathing came in shallow, irregular gasps that spoke of failing systems. David had seen this pattern before in human patients, though never quite like this. How long have they been like this? David asked, kneeling beside the cubs and carefully observing their condition without touching them yet. 6 days since they stopped eating. Nala replied in halting human speech. 2 days since they stopped responding to our voices. David opened his scanner and ran it over Ash, the smallest of the cubs. The readings made no immediate sense. Lupari physiology operated on completely different principles than human biology. They appeared to have 2 separate circulatory systems, one for oxygenated blood and another for something his instruments couldn't identify. Interesting, David muttered, making notes in his medical journal. Your people have redundant life support systems. That's probably why they've survived this long. Storm's breathing suddenly became more labored and his small body convulsed slightly. Nala immediately moved to his side, making soft sounds that seemed to comfort the dying cub. Her maternal instincts transcended species boundaries, and David felt a familiar tightness in his chest as he watched her gentle care. I need to take some samples, David explained, pulling out a small needle and collection vials. Blood, saliva, anything that might tell me what we're fighting. Nala's lips pulled back to reveal impressive fangs. You will not pierce my cubs with metal. It's the only way to help them, David said firmly. A tiny prick now or we lose them forever. Your choice. The standoff lasted several tense seconds before Riven spoke. Let him try, Nala. We have exhausted every other option. David worked quickly and efficiently, collecting samples from each cub while their parents watched every movement. His hands remained steady despite the emotional weight of the situation. Combat medicine had taught him to compartmentalize feelings until the work was done. The samples revealed something troubling when David analyzed them with his portable equipment. The pathogen attacking the cubs appeared to be artificial, engineered to target specific genetic markers unique to Lupari physiology. This was not a natural disease, but something deliberately created. This doesn't make sense, David said, running the tests again to confirm his findings. Who would want to harm your species specifically? Riven's ears flattened against his skull. There are those among your people who see us as obstacles to expansion. They want our territory for mining operations. And there are those among mine who believe humans should be driven from this world entirely. Nala added bitterly. Perhaps they found a way to strike at our future. David felt sick as the implications became clear. Someone had weaponized medicine, turning healing knowledge into a tool of genocide. The cubs weren't just sick. They were the victims of biological warfare designed to eliminate the next generation of Lupari. His communication device chirped with an incoming message from Captain Hayes. The text was brief and commanding. Return immediately. Council meeting in 1 hour. Your presence required. David looked at the dying cubs, then at their desperate parents, and made a decision that would define the rest of his career on New Terra. He switched off the communicator and pulled out his medical supplies. I'm going to try something, he announced. It's experimental and risky, but these cubs are dying anyway. We have nothing to lose. Nala moved protectively closer to her children. What do you intend to do? Human antiviral compounds might be able to disrupt the pathogen's reproduction cycle. I'll need to modify the dosage for Lupari physiology, which means starting with tiny amounts and monitoring their response constantly. And if you're wrong? Riven asked. David met his golden gaze steadily. Then I'll have killed your cubs instead of whatever bastard designed this plague. But if I'm right, we might save not just them but every young Lupari on this planet. The silence stretched between species and cultures, broken only by the labored breathing of 3 small patients. Finally, Nala nodded once, a mother's terrible gamble with her children's lives. David prepared the first injection, his hands rock-steady despite the weight of responsibility. Outside, the Lupari settlement went about its daily routines, unaware that their future hung on the success or failure of experimental xenomedicine being performed by a human medic who was probably about to be court-martialed for insubordination. As the needle entered Ash's tiny arm, David whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening. In his experience, divine intervention was rare, but scientific determination combined with desperate love sometimes created miracles. David had been living in the Lupari settlement for 5 days, and his presence still caused ripples of unease throughout the community. He had set up a makeshift medical station in a small alcove near Riven's dwelling, using equipment jury-rigged from human technology and Lupari craftsmanship. The combination looked chaotic but functioned better than expected. The cubs showed minimal improvement. Ash had stopped getting worse, which David considered a victory even if it was a small one. Storm remained critical, his breathing shallow and irregular. Amber drifted between periods of restless sleep and moments of painful consciousness that broke her parents' hearts. Nala had not left the medical station since David began treatment. She slept curled around her cubs, one ear always turned toward the human medic's movements. Her initial hostility had evolved into wary acceptance, though she still flinched whenever David reached for a new instrument. "Your hands are different," she observed during one of their quiet conversations. David looked down at his scarred fingers as he prepared another dose of modified antiviral compound. "Different how?" "Most humans I have seen move with sharp, quick motions, like they want to grab and control everything around them. Your hands move like water, gentle but certain." The comparison amused David, though he understood what she meant. Combat medics learn to work with confidence and minimal force. Injured soldiers needed healing touch, not aggressive intervention that might cause additional trauma. "I learned to use these hands in war," David explained, checking Storm's temperature with a thermal scanner, "but not for fighting. For fixing what fighting breaks. War between humans and others like us on worlds far from here. Too many wars, really." David made notes in his medical journal documenting every change in the cub's condition. "I got tired of watching people die for causes that seemed less important than the lives they cost." Nala considered this while grooming Ash's fur with long, careful strokes. "Is that why you came here? To heal instead of hurt?" "Something like that." David didn't mention that he had come to New Terra to escape memories that followed him across star systems. The colonies offered distance from past failures, though apparently not from new responsibilities. A commotion outside the medical station interrupted their conversation. Elder Thorn approached with several other senior pack members, their expressions ranging from disapproval to outright anger. The ancient Lupari moved with the careful dignity of advanced age, but his eyes burned with fierce intelligence. "This has gone far enough," Thorn announced in heavily accented human speech. "The human brings strange substances into our settlement and performs unknown rituals on our young. How do we know he is not making them worse?" Riven emerged from a side passage, his own frustration evident in every line of his body. "Because our traditional methods have already failed, honored elder. The cubs would be dead now without his intervention." "Death is part of nature's cycle," Thorn replied sternly. "We should not disrupt the natural order by accepting help from those who poison our world with their machines and chemicals." David continued working while the argument developed around him, but he listened carefully to every word. Cultural resistance to outside medical intervention was common in isolated communities, even human ones. Fear of the unknown often outweighed desperate need for help. "Natural order?" Nala's voice carried a dangerous edge as she stood to face the elders. "There is nothing natural about watching your children waste away while you do nothing. If accepting human help makes me a traitor to tradition, then I embrace that label gladly." The confrontation might have escalated, but Storm chose that moment to open his eyes and make a small sound that resembled a question. David immediately moved to check the cub's vital signs while both parents crowded close to their son. "Hey there, little one," David said softly, running a gentle scan over Storm's small body. "Feeling a bit better?" Storm's golden eyes focused on the human with curiosity rather than fear. One tiny paw reached out and touched David's scarred hand, exploring the unfamiliar texture of human skin. The simple gesture carried more trust than any formal agreement between species. "His temperature is down 0.5 degrees, David announced, unable to suppress a small smile. "His breathing is stronger and his circulation appears improved." "It's working." Elder Thorn studied the scene with conflicted emotions. Lupari tradition valued strength and self-reliance above all else, but it also demanded protection of the young. Watching a human save what Lupari medicine could not challenge fundamental beliefs about their people's superiority. "How do we know this improvement will last?" Thorn asked, though his tone had lost some of its hostility. "We don't," David admitted honestly. "Medicine involves calculated risks, especially when treating conditions we don't fully understand. But the alternative is certainly death, while this treatment offers hope for recovery. Hope built on alien science and strange chemicals. Hope built on the same principles that drive Lupari healers," David corrected. "Observation, experimentation, and the refusal to accept defeat when young lives hang in the balance. The tools are different, but the motivation is identical." Ash stirred and attempted to lift her head, managing to hold the position for several seconds before settling back down. Her movement was weak but deliberate, the first purposeful action she had taken in days. Nala made a sound of joy that transcended species barriers. "Two of them are responding," David said, making detailed notes about the cub's progress. "Ember is still critical, but if the treatment continues working, we might have turned the corner." Elder Thorn watched the human medic work with growing fascination. David's movements combined scientific precision with intuitive care that spoke of extensive experience. His scarred hands never trembled, despite the enormous pressure of saving alien children under hostile scrutiny. "You have done this before," Thorn observed. "Saved the young of other species, human young mostly. But the principles are similar. Keep them breathing, maintain their body temperature, provide nutrients they can absorb, and give their immune systems time to fight back." David adjusted Ember's position to help her breathing. "The biggest difference is that I'm working blind with your physiology. Every treatment is a best guess based on limited data. Yet you continue trying, because giving up isn't an option when children are involved." David met the elder's gaze directly. "I've seen too many wars and too much death to walk away from a chance to save young lives, regardless of what species they belong to." Thorn was quiet for a long moment, studying the makeshift medical station and the human who had created it. Traditional Lupari healing relied on natural remedies and spiritual intervention. This human approach seemed crude and mechanical, yet it was achieving results that their time-honored methods could not match. "If these cubs recover fully," Thorn said finally, "what do you expect in return?" David looked surprised by the question. "Nothing. They're children. Helping them is its own reward. Human medicine requires payment, does it not? Not from me. Not for this." David returned his attention to Ember, who had begun showing signs of improved circulation. "I took an oath to do no harm and to heal when possible. That oath doesn't include a fee schedule based on species classification." The elder studied David's scarred hands as they worked with infinite gentleness on the smallest patient. Perhaps there was wisdom in accepting help from unexpected sources, especially when traditional approaches had failed so completely. As the day progressed, Storm managed to drink a small amount of nutrient broth while Ash stayed awake for longer periods. Ember remained critical but stable, her condition no longer deteriorating. David worked through the night, monitoring their progress and adjusting treatments based on their responses. Outside the medical station, word of the cubs' improvement spread through the settlement like wildfire. Some Lupari credited divine intervention, others attributed it to natural recovery. But a growing number began to consider the possibility that humans might offer something valuable beyond conquest and exploitation. David didn't notice the changing attitudes around him. His world had narrowed to 3 small patients, and the complex challenge of keeping them alive long enough for their own biology to overcome the artificial plague designed to destroy them. Dr. Bell arrived at the Lupari settlement just after dawn, her scientific equipment packed into cases that looked distinctly out of place against the organic architecture of carved stone. David met her at the settlement's entrance, surprised to see his colleague but grateful for the additional expertise. "Captain Hayes is furious," Bell announced without preamble. "Half the Colonial Council wants you arrested for violating contact protocols. The other half wants to study what you've accomplished here." "Which half do you represent?" David asked, leading her toward the medical station. "The half that thinks saving children matters more than bureaucratic procedures." Bell studied the settlement with professional interest. "Though I admit I'm also fascinated by the opportunity to observe Lupari biology firsthand." David brought her up to speed on the cub's condition as they walked. Ash and Storm had continued improving, showing increased alertness and appetite. Ember remained stable but hadn't made the same progress as her brothers. The partial success was encouraging but incomplete. "I need to understand their genetics at the molecular level," David explained. "The pathogen is specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in Lupari physiology that I can't identify with my limited equipment." Bell set up her advanced analysis equipment in the medical station while Nala watched with deep suspicion. The Lupari mother had accepted David's presence through necessity, but adding another human to the mix tested her tolerance. "She thinks you're planning experiments on her cubs," David translated after Nala spoke in rapid Lupari. "In a way I am," Bell admitted, "but experiments designed to save them, not harm them. I need genetic samples to map their biological systems." The sampling process required delicate negotiation, Nala refused to allow any invasive procedures, which limited Belle to hair follicles and saliva collection. Even these minimal samples made the mother tense, her protective instincts warring with desperate hope. Belle's analysis revealed biological complexity that amazed both human scientists. Lupari possessed redundant organ systems that provided backup functions if primary systems failed. Their immune responses operated through pathways that had no human equivalent. Most remarkably, their genetic structure included adaptive sequences that could modify themselves in response to environmental challenges. "This is incredible," Belle murmured, studying the genetic readouts. "Their DNA includes programmable sections that rewrite themselves when faced with new threats. It's like biological software that updates itself." "Then why isn't it working against this pathogen?" David asked. "Because someone designed the pathogen to specifically target those adaptive sequences. It's not just attacking their current biology. It's preventing them from evolving defenses." Belle highlighted sections of genetic code on her portable display. "This is sophisticated biological warfare, David. Whoever created this understood Lupari genetics better than the Lupari themselves." David felt sick as the implications became clear. The artificial plague wasn't just meant to kill the current generation of cubs. It was designed to prevent future generations from developing immunity, ensuring permanent vulnerability to similar attacks. "Can we counteract it?" David asked. "Maybe. Their adaptive sequences are dormant, not destroyed. If we can find a way to reactivate them while suppressing the pathogen." Belle trailed off, her mind racing through possibilities. Nala had been listening to their conversation with growing agitation, understanding enough human speech to follow the general direction. When Belle mentioned reactivating genetic sequences, the Lupari mother made a sound of recognition. "The old songs," Nala said suddenly. "Our healers use specific sound patterns to encourage healing. We thought they were symbolic, but what if they actually trigger biological responses?" David and Belle exchanged glances. Sound-based genetic activation was theoretical in human medicine, but possible. If Lupari healing traditions included frequencies that stimulated their adaptive genetics, combining traditional methods with modern medicine might create the breakthrough they needed. "We need to hear these songs," Belle said urgently. Nala called for Elder Thorn, who arrived with obvious reluctance. The idea of sharing sacred healing songs with humans violated every traditional protocol. But the cubs' lives outweighed cultural concerns. Thorn's voice filled the medical station with haunting melodies that seemed to resonate in the stone walls themselves. The songs had no words, only complex patterns of tone and rhythm that spoke to something deeper than conscious understanding. Belle's instruments detected immediate responses in the cubs' biology. Their dormant genetic sequences began showing activity, attempting to rewrite themselves in response to the pathogen. But the process was slow and incomplete, hampered by the artificial virus's interference. "The songs are working, but not fast enough," Belle announced. "The pathogen adapts to counter their genetic changes almost as quickly as they occur." David studied the readouts, his mind working through the medical puzzle. "What if we use the human antiviral compounds to suppress the pathogen, while the songs activate their natural defenses? A two-pronged approach that attacks the virus and strengthens their immunity simultaneously." "It might work," Belle agreed, "but the timing has to be perfect. Too much antiviral and we suppress their immune response along with the pathogen. Too little, and the virus counters their genetic adaptations." They worked through the night calculating dosages and frequencies while Thorn continued the healing songs. Nala maintained her vigil beside the cubs, her presence a constant reminder of what was at stake. Ash was the first to show dramatic improvement. His silver fur began regaining its natural luster, and his breathing strengthened noticeably. Storm followed within hours, sitting up and taking interest in his surroundings for the first time in days. But Ember remained critically ill, her small body struggling against the pathogen despite the combined treatment. Her genetic sequences were responding to the songs, but more slowly than her brothers. David realized she would need a more aggressive approach. "I'm going to try something risky," David announced as Ember's condition worsened. Direct genetic therapy combined with high-dose antivirals and sustained acoustic stimulation. "That could kill her," Belle warned. "She's dying anyway," David replied grimly. "This is our last option." Nala understood enough of the conversation to recognize the gravity of the situation. She moved closer to Ember, adding her own voice to Thorn's healing songs. The combined sounds created harmonics that resonated through the medical station like living music. David administered the experimental treatment, while Belle monitored Ember's biological responses. For several terrifying minutes, the cub's vital signs became erratic as her body fought to process the genetic modifications. Then gradually her systems began stabilizing. "It's working," Belle whispered, watching the readouts with amazement. "Her adaptive sequences are rewriting themselves at an accelerated rate. The pathogen can't keep up with the changes." Ember opened her eyes and looked directly at David, her golden gaze clear and alert for the first time since he had arrived. The tiny cub made a soft sound that might have been thanks or simply acknowledgement of his presence. "All 3 cubs are responding," David announced, exhaustion finally catching up with him. "Their immune systems should be able to handle similar pathogens in the future. They're not just recovering. They're developing permanent immunity." Elder Thorn stopped singing and studied the human medics with new respect. "You have given our young more than healing. You have given them strength to face future challenges." David slumped against the stone wall, emotionally and physically drained. "Just doing my job." But even as he spoke, he knew this was more than medical duty. Somewhere in the process of saving 3 alien cubs, he had discovered something he thought he had lost forever: the ability to heal, rather than merely patch wounds. The scarred hands that had seen too much war had found a different kind of purpose. The news of the cubs' recovery spread across New Terra faster than anyone anticipated. Within days, delegations from both human and Lupari communities arrived at the settlement, though their intentions varied dramatically. Some came to witness the miracle of interspecies cooperation, while others came to end it. David woke to the sound of heated arguments outside the medical station. Through the carved stone entrance, he could see groups of humans and Lupari facing each other in tense standoffs. The successful treatment had become a political flashpoint rather than a medical victory. "The human contaminates our young with alien substances," declared Scar, a younger Lupari male whose pack controlled territory near the mining operations. "How do we know these cubs are truly healed and not changed into something else?" Captain Hayes stood with a group of colonial officials, his expression grim as he watched David emerge from the medical station. "Dr. Ross has violated direct orders and exposed the colony to unknown risks by sharing medical technology with hostile aliens. The only hostility I see comes from those who would rather watch children die than admit they were wrong," Elder Thorn replied, his ancient voice carrying surprising strength. David checked on the cubs before engaging with the political chaos outside. All 3 were alert and playful, their silver fur gleaming with health. Ash attempted to follow David as he moved around the medical station, while Storm practiced pouncing on imaginary prey. Ember, the smallest and most recently recovered, stayed close to her mother but watched everything with bright curiosity. "They look normal to me," Dr. Bell observed, running final scans on each cub. "Their genetic modifications are stable and beneficial. If anything, they're healthier than baseline Lupari physiology." Outside, the arguments continued to escalate. David recognized the pattern from conflict zones where political considerations overshadowed human needs. Fear and prejudice had a way of turning medical breakthroughs into weapons of division. "Dr. Ross," Captain Hayes called out, "you're under arrest for violation of colonial protocols and unauthorized medical intervention." "Actually, he's under pack protection," Riven interjected, moving to stand between David and the human soldiers. "Any attempt to remove him from our territory will be considered an act of aggression." The standoff might have turned violent, but an unexpected development changed everything. Young Lupari and human colonists began arriving at the settlement together, forming mixed groups that defied both species' leadership. They came in small numbers at first, then larger groups as word spread. "They're protecting the medical station," Bell observed with amazement. "Look at them." Human teenagers stood shoulder to shoulder with juvenile Lupari, creating a barrier around the area where David had worked. Some carried signs written in both languages expressing support for continued cooperation. Others simply stood in silent solidarity, their presence more powerful than any words. "My daughter is among them," Captain Hayes said quietly, his anger faltering as he recognized his own child in the crowd. "As is my youngest son," Riven added, spotting a young Lupari male standing beside a human girl who couldn't have been more than 16. The mixed group of young people began singing, their voices blending human melodies with Lupari healing songs. The hybrid music created something entirely new, beautiful, and haunting in ways that neither species could achieve alone. Dr. Bell's instruments detected interesting responses to the combined songs. The healing frequencies were stronger when human and Lupari voices worked together, creating harmonic resonances that neither species produced independently. "This is remarkable," Bell announced to the gathering crowd. "Their vocal ranges complement each other perfectly. Together they can produce therapeutic frequencies that are more effective than traditional Lupari healing songs." Scar stepped forward, his hostility wavering as he heard the music. "Our songs have never sounded like this before." Because they were never meant to be sung alone, Elder Thorn realized, his understanding of ancient traditions suddenly expanding. "The old stories speak of harmony between different voices. We thought they meant metaphorical harmony, but perhaps they were literal instructions." David felt a shift in the crowd's mood as the implications became clear. The disease hadn't just been an attack on Lupari cubs. It had been an attempt to prevent both species from discovering their potential for cooperation. Someone had tried to weaponize medicine to maintain division and conflict. "Who benefits from keeping our peoples separated?" David asked the assembled leaders. Captain Hayes and Riven exchanged glances, both thinking of the same answer. The mining consortium that wanted unrestricted access to Lupari. Territory had been pressuring both governments to resolve the native problem through relocation or other means. The pathogen was too sophisticated for random development, Bell added. Someone with access to both human technology and detailed knowledge of Lupari biology created it specifically to target their young. "A human company with alien research contracts," Riven said grimly. "They study our people under the guise of peaceful cooperation, then use that knowledge to harm us." The revelation united the crowd in shared outrage. Young humans and Lupari, who had grown up together on New Terra, had no tolerance for corporate manipulation that threatened their friends and neighbors. Their protective instincts transcended species loyalty. "What do we do about it?" asked Sarah, Captain Hayes' daughter, speaking for the mixed group of young people. David looked around at the faces watching him, human and Lupari alike. These weren't soldiers or politicians. They were young people who had seen beyond the barriers that separated their parents. Their presence offered hope for a different kind of future. "We document everything," David said. "The pathogen samples, the treatment protocols, the genetic modifications that saved the cubs. We make sure the evidence reaches people who can shut down whoever is responsible. And we continue the medical cooperation program," Bell added. "This breakthrough is too important to abandon because of political pressure." Elder Thorn stepped forward, his ancient voice carrying absolute authority. "The pack accepts formal alliance with human healers. Our young will grow stronger together than either species could achieve alone." Captain Hayes hesitated, knowing that such an alliance would end his career if the colonial government disapproved. But looking at his daughter standing beside Lupari friends, protecting something she believed in, he realized some things mattered more than regulations. "The colony also accepts this alliance," Hayes announced. "Effective immediately, the medical cooperation program has official support." The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices creating another round of spontaneous harmony between species. David watched the celebration with quiet satisfaction, knowing that 3 small cubs had become the foundation for something much larger. Storm chose that moment to escape from the medical station and waddle into the crowd on unsteady legs. The tiny cub showed no fear of the assembled humans and Lupari, accepting attention from anyone willing to pet his soft fur. His innocent trust symbolized the future both species were choosing to build together. "He doesn't see enemies," David observed as Storm played with human and Lupari children alike. "He just sees people who care about him." "Perhaps that's the lesson we needed to learn," Riven replied, watching his son interact with the mixed crowd. "Fear and mistrust are taught behaviors. Cooperation and compassion might be more natural than we realized." As the day progressed, the makeshift medical station began transforming into something permanent. Human engineers worked alongside Lupari craftsmen to create facilities that combined the best of both technologies. The collaboration felt natural, as if both species had been waiting for permission to work together. David knew there would be challenges ahead. Political resistance from both governments, corporate retaliation, and cultural conflicts that couldn't be resolved with medical breakthroughs. But watching young humans and Lupari planning their shared future, he felt optimistic about the outcome. 3 dying cubs had become the catalyst for unprecedented cooperation between species that had seemed destined for conflict. Sometimes the smallest patients carried the greatest potential for healing wounds that extended far beyond individual illness. 3 months after the cubs' recovery, the Lupari settlement had transformed into something unprecedented on New Terra. The permanent medical facility stood as a testament to interspecies cooperation, its architecture blending human engineering with Lupari artistic sensibilities. Stone walls incorporated advanced life support systems, while carved healing chambers housed equipment that neither species could have created alone. David stood in the central treatment room, reviewing patient files that included both human and Lupari names. The success of the cubs' treatment had led to a steady stream of medical cases requiring xenological expertise. Broken bones, viral infections, and chronic conditions that had seemed incurable were yielding to hybrid treatment approaches. Dr. Ross called out Mira, a young human technician who had learned to speak functional Lupari in just 2 months. The morning patients are ready for examination. The waiting area held a typical mix of species and ages. A human farmer with a persistent cough sat beside an elderly Lupari female, whose arthritis had responded well to combined human anti-inflammatory drugs and traditional Lupari mobility exercises. 2 Lupari adolescents waited for routine health checks, their parents having overcome cultural resistance to human medical practices. But David's attention focused on 3 small silver shapes, playing in the children's area. Ash, Storm, and Ember had become unofficial ambassadors for the medical cooperation program, their vibrant health serving as living proof of what collaboration could achieve. Ash had appointed himself David's unofficial assistant, following the human medic around the facility and mimicking his movements with serious concentration. The young cub had learned to recognize basic medical instruments and could fetch supplies with surprising accuracy. Storm had developed into the athlete of the family, his enhanced immune system giving him energy that exhausted his parents. He spent most days practicing hunting techniques with human children, who had adapted Lupari movement patterns into new games that both species enjoyed. Ember remained the gentle observer, content to sit quietly during medical procedures and offer comfort to nervous patients. Her calm presence had a measurable effect on treatment outcomes, reducing stress hormones in both human and Lupari patients. "They're not quite normal cubs anymore," Nala observed, watching her children with mixed pride and concern. The genetic modifications changed more than just their immunity. Changed how? David asked, making notes about Storm's latest physical development scores. They understand both languages instinctively, adapt to new situations faster than typical cubs, and show cognitive abilities that surpass baseline Lupari development. Nala paused in her grooming routine. They're evolving in real time. Dr. Bell emerged from her research laboratory with data tablets and an expression of barely contained excitement. "David, you need to see this. The cubs aren't just immune to artificial pathogens. They're developing resistance to dozens of diseases that neither species has encountered yet." The implications were staggering. The emergency treatment had triggered evolutionary adaptations that prepared the cubs for biological challenges that might not emerge for generations. Their immune systems were essentially future-proofing themselves against unknown threats. "How is that possible?" David asked, reviewing Bell's genetic analysis data. "Their adaptive sequences are operating at accelerated rates, running genetic simulations, and preparing antibodies for theoretical pathogens. It's like their biology is modeling future biological warfare scenarios and developing countermeasures in advance." Elder Thorne entered the medical facility with his usual dignified bearing, though David noticed the ancient Lupari moved with less stiffness than before. The elder had been receiving treatment for age-related joint problems, combining human pain management with traditional Lupari healing practices. "The mining consortium has withdrawn their claims from Lupari territory," Thorne announced without preamble. The evidence of their biological warfare program reached the Colonial Oversight Committee. Several executives face criminal charges. David felt satisfaction at the news, though it couldn't undo the suffering caused by their artificial plague. Justice was slow and imperfect, but at least future attempts at genocidal engineering would face stronger oversight. "There's more," Thorne continued. The colonial government has formally recognized Lupari territorial rights and established the Medical Cooperation Program as a permanent institution. Both species will benefit from continued collaboration. Captain Hayes arrived for his weekly briefing, accompanied by his daughter Sarah, who had become fluent in Lupari and served as a cultural liaison between species. The captain's initial resistance to the medical program had evolved into enthusiastic support once he witnessed the practical benefits. Productivity is up across all sectors, Hayes reported. Lupari knowledge of local ecology is helping human farmers achieve better crop yields, while human technology is improving Lupari infrastructure development. The economic benefits alone justify expanded cooperation. But David knew the real victory wasn't economic or political. It was visible in the children's area, where young humans and Lupari played together as if species differences were simply variations in height and fur color. They were growing up with assumptions about cooperation that would reshape both cultures. Storm wandered over and climbed into David's lap with the casual affection of a favorite nephew. The cub had grown considerably since his recovery, but still enjoyed physical contact with the human who had saved his life. His presence was warm and comforting, a living reminder of what medical dedication could accomplish. "Will you stay?" Storm asked in careful human speech, his vocabulary improving daily through constant practice. "For as long as I'm needed," David replied, scratching behind the cub's ears in a gesture that had become routine. "Good," Storm said with finality, settling into David's lap as if the matter was permanently resolved. Ash approached with a small collection of stones arranged in patterns that matched medical diagrams David had been studying. The young cub had developed an intuitive understanding of biological systems that impressed even experienced physicians. "Is this correct?" Ash asked, pointing to his stone arrangement that represented Lupari circulatory pathways. "Perfect," David confirmed. "You might have a future in medicine yourself." Ash's ears perked forward with pleasure, though he immediately began rearranging the stones into new configurations. His enhanced cognitive abilities made him a remarkably quick learner, though David sometimes worried about the pressure of accelerated development. Ember remained content to observe the interactions around her, occasionally offering soft sounds of encouragement when patients seemed nervous. Her gentle nature had made her beloved by both species, and several families had requested her presence during difficult medical procedures. "They're not just surviving," Nala observed, watching her cubs interact with the diverse crowd of humans and Lupari. "They're thriving in ways that wouldn't have been possible before the illness." David nodded, understanding what she meant. The cubs had gained more than immunity through their treatment. They had become bridges between species, naturally comfortable in ways that adults struggled to achieve. Their very existence proved that cooperation could create something better than either species could accomplish alone. As the day progressed, David found himself thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. He had come to New Terra to escape memories of war and failure, seeking distance from responsibilities that felt too heavy to bear. Instead, he had discovered that healing could take many forms, and that sometimes the smallest patients carried the greatest potential for change. The three cubs had taught him that medicine wasn't just about treating disease. It was about building bridges, fostering understanding, and creating possibilities for futures that seemed impossible. Their recovery had become the foundation for something much larger than individual health. Storm fell asleep in David's arms as the medical facility settled into its evening routine. The cub's peaceful breathing reminded the human medic of why he had chosen medicine in the first place, before wars and politics complicated the simple act of helping those in need. Outside, the settlement buzzed with activity as humans and Lupari worked together on projects that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Children of both species played games that incorporated elements from each culture, creating new traditions that belonged to neither species and both. David looked down at the sleeping cub in his arms and smiled. Sometimes the most important battles were fought not with weapons, but with steady hands, scientific knowledge, and the simple refusal to let children die while adults argued about politics. The scars on his hands had found their purpose at last.